Okay, so let's begin. Welcome to this webinar, Why Your Millennial Employees Are Just Not That Into You and What to Do About it. Actually, truth be told, this is more the why they're not into you. Um, this is the slide from a conference presentation I did a couple of weeks ago. Forgot to take that bottom line out. And just a quick recap. So my name's David Lee. A quick recap. Um, there were some pieces in the conference presentation I did a couple weeks ago that I really wanted to cover with the group, and I wasn't able to, so I thought I would do it in a follow-up webinar. And I'm also doing a version of this presentation next week at the SHRM conference, and so I thought I'd extract some of the key takeaway messages from that and add it to this. So this is sort of extracts from two different presentations combined. So here we go. So what we'll cover is these 7 guiding principles and 3 lenses or mental models, if you will, for examining why millennial employees are just not that into you. And just super quick backstory related to this. If you think about the fact that despite the concept of employee engagement being around for over 15 years now, employee engagement numbers have basically not changed despite literally billions of dollars spent on this issue. And one of the biggest sources of puzzlement among the managers and employers that I work with is the millennial generation. Whether it's framed as how do you motivate them or how do you manage them, etc. And this is especially important if you're in a field where talent is a key differentiator. Obviously, every business you want to have talent, but if you're like in the high tech or some other fields where hard to find talent is a limiting factor, getting good at engaging your millennials, especially as they become more and more of the workforce, is so critical. So let's get into it. So guiding principle number 1, if you hire the right people, your job is not to motivate them, it's to not demotivate them. Oh, and by the way, I will give you the slides to this. This is something that world-class leaders and world-class sports coaches often note, and it's this fact that my job isn't to motivate people, it's to make sure I don't demotivate them. If you hire the right people, they're already motivated. Guiding principle number 2. So this is the hashtag SHRM16. This is one of the slides from the upcoming conference I'm presenting on Monday. If your employees are just not that into you, it's probably because they don't experience you as being into them. And even though I'm saying like, just not that into you, I don't mean that as an in-your-face challenge to you in particular, but it's something that every employer, every manager needs to recognize. And you think about your own experience where, and I actually have an article on this coming out shortly. If you think about your own experience when you've had managers who clearly didn't really care about you, your well-being, weren't interested in helping you grow professionally, et cetera. You were just a number to them. You were just an object that produced a result, or an employer that clearly didn't wasn't really concerned about their employees. You weren't as concerned about them. You weren't as into doing a great job and making a difference. And so it's so important to look at what are ways that we are not connecting with employees, and especially our millennials, as human beings, as individuals. And that's, excuse me, especially important with the millennial generation. So you see this recent research, top 5 drivers of millennial employee engagement. 2 of the 5 relate to the desire to be treated as an individual, as a human being, not just a number, a role, or machine that produces an output. And so that human touch is so, so critical. And that's one of the things that I've noticed in doing interviews with millennials and then interviews with managers who are known for being really good at managing millennials. They talk about the importance of frequent one-on-one meetings around not just on performance, but how you're doing as, just as a human being, things that we could be talking about career-wise, help you grow, etc. And then I'm sure you want to know what the other three are. Here they are. So the next guiding principle is when we are careless in our treatment of others, we teach them to care less about us. And I hope you reflect on that both personally and professionally, and just think about people that you deal with, let's say personally, where you'll like check in, hey, just want to make sure everything's okay, and you don't hear back from them. And then finally, let's say a month goes by and they're like, yeah, sorry I didn't get back to you, but I was busy. And there's no indication that they recognize that that was a kind thing for you to do as a friend to make sure they're doing okay. And after a few sort of careless treatments like that, you stop being so concerned about them. And so if you don't hear from them for a while, or if they don't respond to your voicemail or email, you're like, whatever, they'll let me know whenever. And so that's sort of a personal life example. You think about in your professional life when you've had managers. Well, actually, let me share with you some of the examples of how employees are taught to care less and less and less. So ask yourself if you see these going on in your organization, or maybe you'll think of previous places that you've worked if you're currently working in a great organization. Management doesn't show empathy for the impact of their decisions. So it's just sort of like this suck it up attitude when some organizational change makes it not just harder personally for employees, but harder for them to do their job well. That's one of the major sources of frustration I've heard over the years with employees, where management doesn't ask people in the trenches for how would this possible change that we're thinking about, how would that affect your ability to do your job well? Also, management not showing empathy for the effects of their behavior and their treatment for others. Management that is all business, that's impersonal, that's in transactional. And I put this in red because this is what I believe is sort of like the, quote, dirty little secret in employee engagement, is so much of why employee engagement efforts fail is because they don't address the relational piece of the work experience. And so much of the manager, direct report, senior leadership, employee workforce, so much of those interactions are all business and personal and transactional versus relating human being to human being. Let me give you a quick example because I want you to be thinking about this, and I encourage you to share this with your management team and use it as a catalyst to explore how this might be going on in your organization. So I want to give you an example of what I'm talking about. This is actually something that just happened recently with a project that I was supervising, where there was a videographer and various video talent who were being interviewed. And this particular video that the moment I saw, I thought, man, these guys just totally rocked, both the interviewee and the videographer. And so I shot them like a reply all email saying, hey, thanks so much for an awesome video. So-and-so, you were fantastic as an interviewee. Here's why. So-and-so videographer, man, way to put together a really, not just content positive, a really great content video, but just artistically, it was great. And it was so funny. It just made me smile because I was in the midst of preparing for this upcoming conference, and I was writing about this transactional and personal all business theme. And so I smiled to myself when I got the reply all emails back from these two gentlemen that were just all transactional. The person who had been interviewed said, look forward to seeing the video. When will it be posted? The videographer's response was, that's up to David. When is it okay for it to be posted? No, hey, thanks for the feedback. I'm really glad you liked. No human-to-human interaction. And I thought, that's exactly the kind of thing that happens so often in the workplace, and why in so many workplaces people don't bring their heart and soul to work. They leave those at home because it's so robotic and transactional. Another common reason is non-responsiveness is the norm. So you think about your own experience. I'll keep it strictly like say with you and your manager. You send something to your manager that either you said I will be sure to send you such and such, or they ask you to send the such and such. You send it to them and they don't let you know if you received it. And let's say maybe in the beginning you're like, I hope they got it, and I don't want them to think I gave my word that I'd get it to them and it's lost in spam folder or something like that. And so you're like, I don't want to nag, but I still want to make sure they got it. So you reach out and they're like, yeah, I got it. And you're thinking, it'd be nice if you had taken the 1 second to hit reply and say, thanks, I got it. And after a few times of that, if you're like me, you start to not really care. So if they don't get it, they'll let you know. And you could just say, I did send it to you, and just resend it. And so when you think about when people are careless with how they treat us, we begin to care less about them. And one of the things I love that Google does, and it's so painfully obvious, yet so few organizations have this as part of their culture, is Google, being super smart, they have the gut it practice, that when you send something important, they just shoot back gut it, period. So you're like, okay, loop is closed, I can move on. I don't have to follow up to make sure they got it, especially when it's deadline driven. Managerial entitlement is the norm. Now, I could go on and on about this. Actually, this is part of the upcoming article that if you're on my e-zine list, you will get. One example of managerial entitlement is expecting irrational timelines on things. I'll give you something that I remember hearing. I was doing a program for, I think it was middle managers in an organization, and one of the employees said, and this was a woman in her 40s or 50s, so it was a seasoned professional, nobody entitled or anything like that, and she said, I think one of the problems with our senior team is because whenever they give us some nearly impossible thing to do, we always make it happen. And so they end up thinking, they don't realize the toll it took on us, and they end up thinking it's no big deal. And so they keep making these really, irrational, having these irrational expectations. Another classic example of managerial entitlement is my poor planning now makes it your emergency. And so whether it's senior leadership or your direct supervisor waiting to the last minute to give you something that they need done immediately, whereas if they had planned better, they would have given you more time to do it without wrecking your schedule, your personal life, or just dropping everything else. And then a version of managerial entitlement that deserves its own heading, which is why it gets its own heading, is unrealistic and unnecessary deadlines. And so let's say your manager says, I want this done by Monday morning. So you work over the weekend, don't have a personal time, don't spend time with your family, get it to your boss on Monday morning, and they actually don't need it until a meeting that following Friday, for instance. And so after a while, it doesn't take too much of that to not be so gung-ho about going the extra mile and feeling frustrated and disrespected. Okay, next guiding principle. You don't improve employee engagement with goodies, gimmicks, and gala events. You do it through building relationships and having the important conversations. And this is one of the big reasons why so often employers opt for, oh, we'll have employee barbecue or dress down Friday or employee appreciation event, or look at what companies like Google and Facebook and other best places to work companies do for goodies. And they say, okay, that's the key to engagement. And the analogy that I sometimes use, and I've got an article about this titled, Are You Really Serious About Improving Morale? The analogy I use, and this is actually based on back when I was, I used to be a counselor, and when sometimes when I had couples come to see me because the relationship was in trouble. Sometimes the husband would be puzzled why his wife was upset. And he's like, I don't know why she's upset. Like, I'm really good to her. I just, refinished the kitchen, and, I just bought her a new car. Like, what's up with her? And just the fact that he asks that question and that's his idea of the solution when she says we don't have a quality relationship gives you some ideas about why the relationship is in trouble. And it's the same thing with employers. If they think having Dress Down Friday or on-site chair massage is the ticket, they're totally missing the point. The point is those things are fine if they're an accurate reflection of a relationship of respect and a work experience that's intrinsically rewarding. So those things are like the frosting on the cake. The cake is the work experience. And what it takes to engage millennials and employees of any generation is cultivating the relationships and having the conversations around what can we do together to make this the best possible work experience in general and the best possible one for you. What can we do together to help bring out the best in you? So you can go ahead and put in questions. I'm just going to stop for a second, enlarge the control panel to, see if there's any questions here. Okay, no questions? Okay, cool. I'm going to collapse it again. And so the bigger picture of the point that I just mentioned is that every better business result you want requires building better relationships and having better conversations. So whether it's improving patient experience, whether it's increasing client retention or increasing sales or just increasing productivity, whatever those business results are, because you're getting results through people, the better you are at building relationships, and relationships boil down to at the essence is how we interact with each other. And so no employee engagement program works without having really productive dialogue with employees to find out what are we doing that makes it hard for you to do your job well? What are we doing that makes it frustrating to be here? What could we be doing to help you be at your best, et cetera, et cetera. And actually, I've got a new article out that maybe you've read that has a list of around 20 questions that managers can be asking that help them have those conversations that will get them the information they need to engage the millennial. And just the fact that you're having the conversation boosts engagement, because back to employees aren't into you because they don't feel like you're into them. Just the fact that you have the managers have these conversations communicates, I care about you, I care about my impact on you, I want to do my part to make this the best experience possible. Next guiding principle, each person has their own engagement recipe. This is why employee engagement surveys do not cut it. They're fine in general, but employee engagement is an individual experience. What motivates me, what drives me nuts, is different from what motivates you, what drives you nuts. People in R&D versus people in marketing versus people in production, very different demographics in terms of engagement drivers. And then to take it down in an even more granular level, each employee in each department, because everybody's an individual, has their unique recipe. And so that's why we need to have the conversations in order to find out what can we be doing together to make this the best possible work experience and bring out your best. Next guiding principle, think coach-athlete versus boss-subordinate, therapist-patient, or parent-child. And especially with the millennial generation, boss-subordinate, as you probably have noticed, doesn't really work, since If you're of an older generation, most millennials were raised very differently than our generation. So very different comfort level challenging authority, very different comfort level being around people in authority positions and not seeing them as that way. And so instead you want to think of coach athlete. And so each person is worthy of respect and each person has their own skill set and area of expertise, and it's the combined effect and the interplay between the two that allows the athlete to perform at their best. So those are the 7 guiding principles that are really helpful. Now actually I identified 6. I have the 7th for the big grand finale. The 3 lenses to view engagement with. Number 1 is applying the same thought process and methodology that companies known for world-class customer service apply when trying to create the ultimate customer experience. And so one principle is the more you understand your customer, the more you're able to design a customer experience that separates you from the others and makes your ideal customer want to tell all their friends. So the more you understand each employee as well as what the different professions want, the more you're able to create an experience that attracts, retains, and engages that particular demographic. And then, because engagement is an individual experience, the more each manager understands what makes each employee tick, then they're able to create the perfect employee experience for that person. So as I mentioned before, when we're careless, we teach people to care less. The companies known for world-class customer service are very clear on creating an experience versus just being transactional and being relational versus impersonal. So the difference between checking in at a hotel that's a real low-end hotel where the person is indifferent and just does the bare minimum, very impersonal and transactional, versus going to a great hotel that's very conscious of the guest experience. Number 3, what do we want them to feel? What impression do we want to leave them with? So when I do programs or write about employer branding, that's one of the things I talk about. What's the emotional takeaway? What's the perceptual takeaway we want this moment of truth to leave them with? And it's true in every aspect of the employee experience, just like it is with a customer experience. So we're rolling out this change. What do we want them to feel? What impression do we want them to have about this change? I'm giving feedback to my employee. So what do I want them to feel? What impression do I want them to have about me and working here, etc. So bringing that level of mindfulness and intentionality to the employee experience. The second lens is through the lens of volunteer psychology. This is something I came up with years ago, but have actually not really talked about in the last 7 to 10 years that much. And basically where this came from was doing a talk one time years ago on attracting, retaining employees, and somebody from a nonprofit said, well, we can't attract the kind of talent that marquee names companies can, and also companies who can pay a lot more because we're a nonprofit, we can't pay much. And I started thinking about that complaint, and it made me think about, wait a minute, you think about in volunteer organizations, people do all kinds of amazing things and they don't get paid at all. Why is that? Think about yourself. Why do you volunteer? You don't get paid. Nobody gives you benefits package. Why is that? Well, when I looked at like all the different reasons why people volunteer and asked people in seminars, that basically they boil down to 3 different areas. People volunteer because they believe in the mission in the organization. And so they do all kinds of really hard, unpleasant labor that's not intrinsically rewarding because they believe in the mission of the organization. And so one of the ways of inspiring passion, not just in your millennials, but all your employees, is doing a great job of connecting employees with your mission, your vision, what your organization is about. And a big part of that, if you've listened to other programs of mine, you've heard me talk about sharing stories of the great things that your organization does, stories about employees doing great things. Number two reason why people volunteer is they just like the work experience. And so I've actually volunteered to help out at events that, the event I believed in, but I wasn't passionate about the event, but it gave me a chance to develop skills that I oftentimes am not able to use in my typical line of work. And I bet you've done that too. I used to volunteer at an animal shelter, and even though I believed in the mission, I wasn't particularly bonded to the organization, wasn't a particularly great organization, but I loved the work. I loved playing with the dogs, running with the dogs, etc. And so even though I wasn't a company man, if you will, in terms of the nonprofit, what kept me coming back and what inspired me was the actual work. So you've got employees that they could work anywhere. They're not really mission-driven people. They are career-driven. They are profession-driven. So this might be oftentimes people such as engineers or accountants or physicians or plumbers who they got into their line of work because they loved the doing of the work. Dealing with people, where they work, et cetera, was sort of secondary. And so with those people, you want to make sure you're doing everything possible that allows them to be engaged with their work, that allows them to do the great work that they want to do and why they got into that profession. And there's a whole other, many other layers to this, but for our purposes, that's that for now. And last but not least, you join organizations to be connected with people who share your passion, people who are like you. And as you might know from Gallup's research, is the number one reason why people stayed with employers during times when they might otherwise leave was because of the relationships they had at work. And so that's another reason, especially with jobs that are, let's say, janitorial jobs or some, production worker jobs that are not intrinsically exciting or necessarily rewarding. That's where connecting them with the mission and how your job is part of something that does really good things in the world, and then making sure, if you're a manager, you're the kind of manager that employees can bond to and want to please, and making sure that you cultivate a sense of camaraderie. That's with those people especially, it's important. Also, FYI, with millennials, feeling connected with their peers is hugely important and often a reason for turnover with your new hires. And then last but not least, the third model is, or lens, is the lens, a mental model or lens, is the lens of human nature. So good old Cesar Millan, again, if you've heard me talk, you've probably heard me use this analogy. Cesar Millan is a dog whisperer. He's able to bring out the best in dogs whose owners thought the dogs were a problem because the owners didn't understand canine nature, where Cesar Millan does. And so managers who are, quote, people whisperers know how to create the conditions that bring out the best in people. They know what human needs need to be present for people to feel passionate, engaged, and perform at their best. So those are the three lenses. The last guiding principle that I want to end off with is the secret gift your millennials are giving you, and it's that they're your canary in the coal mine. And I actually wrote about this 7 or 8 years ago, I think, and then just revised it and put it in on my LinkedIn, one of my LinkedIn posts with the picture on the left, because it's also one of the unrecognized aspects of the whole, like, what's up with these millennials thing? And that is, when you look at the research, what millennials want in an employer and in a manager, it's pretty much the same thing that we all want. The issue is, for employers, is that millennials are not so bashful about asking or demanding for feeling like their work has meaning, or having their input matter, or getting a chance to, or be treated with respect, or getting ongoing feedback, etc. And so the canary in the coal mine harkens back to when coal miners would go underground. They'd bring a canary in a cage, and if the canary, poor little bird, dropped dead, it meant there was starting to become poisonous gases in the tunnel, and because the canary was more sensitive than human beings, that would be their warning sign to get above ground. And so if you're having turnover issues with your millennials, they're your canary in the coal mine, that there are things that your organization are doing that are resulting in low engagement for all employees. It's just that the older generations tend to stay and just become disengaged, that phenomenon of presenteeism. So recognizing the gift that millennials are giving you is a huge, again, under-recognized factor of this whole what's up with the millennials. So I actually went 2 minutes over. Apologize for that. You have more, if you have questions about any of this, there's my contact info. Any questions? So we're officially done. Thanks for being here. You will get the handouts, and this is recorded, so you can share it with others. But I'll stay on the line if you have any questions you want me to answer now. So awesome, thanks. I appreciate that, Diane. Thank you. Any other either comments or questions before I sign off? Going once, going twice. And if you're interested, obviously, in the long version of this, longer. Oh, okay. Here we question. Just reach out to me. Any quick? Okay, let me get this. Any quick? Let's see. What's this say? Okay. Any quick tips? Any quick tips for weekly chats? So yeah, just off the top of my head, and as simple as how are things going? Are you getting a chance to be doing the things that tap into your strengths that you enjoy most? Anything I can be doing to remove any obstacles? How things going in general? That's one of the things that especially millennials appreciate, that showing interest in them as a human being. Also, in the questions that every manager should ask their employees. There's a bunch more questions you can add to the weekly. But from my interviews with millennials, what I hear is, don't just make it about work, make it about, who I am as an individual, what I'm into, where I'm going, etc. So any other questions? So I will send you a follow-up link with the handouts, and also a link to that article. And also, if you haven't read How a Company Lost A-List Talent and How to Keep That from Happening, I definitely recommend you read that. That's based on an interview I did with a super talented millennial. So no other questions. Thanks for attending, and please spread the word. Thanks so much. Talk to you later. Bye.